Moana 2 is the sequel to the very popular and very successful original film that came out in 2016, 8 years ago. Goddamn, time flies. And in this film, it's been at least a couple years since this and the last film, enough time for Moana to get a new little sister. The island of Motunui is still thriving. They're riding the high where we last left them. But Moana is out there constantly trying to find a way to reconnect the people of her island to everyone else connected by the ocean. There's some kind of spiritual thing disconnecting everybody from reuniting and communicating with each other, living together in harmony. So she sets out on another quest to break another curse to help make the ocean and just overall the world a better place. If you remember, I reviewed the first movie when it came out and I loved it then, and I still love it today. I rewatched it before seeing this and I was like, man, this is just, you know, getting so many things right that I love about not just like a Disney animation or even a Disney musical, but just movies in general. You know, they have fantastic looking visuals, these fun action sequences, great character design, fun creature design, a pretty instantly iconic musical soundtrack, some really great voice acting, and two fantastic characters in Moana and Maui, those being the leads in the last film that were coming back for this. And I think I knew even back then, like, if they made a sequel to this, they might have something because, you know, exploring mythology, there's a lot that you could do with that can impact the world and also grow our characters, how it personally affects them. So you might be thinking to yourself, oh, well, Jackson clearly had this as his most anticipated film of the year, or at the very least, one of the most anticipated for the fall-winter movie season. If you love the first film so much and saw potential in another, clearly he was really hyped up to see this. And if you thought that, all I have to say to you is you're wrong! The announcement of this film came with a really big asterisk, if you remember. And I have a feeling you probably do remember because it happened this year. In February, they had the Disney, earnings call thing, and Bob Iger made the announcement. The previously announced Moana Disney Plus series is now going to be repurposed into a film that is going to be released Thanksgiving this year. So in the span of a year, they took a TV show, chopped it down, made it mold into a new feature-length film, and released it into theaters. Because Bob Iger said when he saw the footage, he was just so gosh darn impressed with it. You know, this has to be seen on the biggest screen possible. And then, you know, it's his job to make things sound better than, you know, they potentially could be, you know, dress them up like it's all part of the plan, or if we deviate, you know, that's actually going to be better for us, so it doesn't matter. Don't be worried about anything ever, investors. Please give us more of your money. But, you know, if you're like me, you're probably aware of the disastrous box office year that was 2023 for Disney. And you're probably also aware that some people started to say, like, yeah, what they're going to do to try to course correct now is to emphasize more on their brands. Their popular characters focus more on sequels, and maybe a couple more remakes as well of popular movies. And Moana, the TV show that was announced for Disney Plus, that came at a time when, I think still during the Bob Chapek era, where, you know, they were just announcing so much shit for their streaming content farm. You know, they just needed to put everything on streaming, even if it wasn't a, you know, great product, or even if it might have been a misguided, you know, idea to put it on there. So I think, you know, in combination with, you know, they're looking for a box office hit, and also they're seeing that, you know, Disney Plus or streaming in general might not be as profitable as people once were led to believe. They saw this show and they were like, why the fuck are we making a sequel that is, you know, in a different format than the movie fans? And, you know, recognizing that it was popular at the time at the box office and it's been a couple years and the fan base is still growing, they're like, yeah, put this shit in the theater. So it kind of reeked a bit more as like a cynical, kind of half-assed idea, kind of like driven by desperation to get a box office hit. So you have that going for it. You also have the fact that now it's Lin-Manuel Miranda-less. You have these two new songwriters coming in that worked on, I think it's the unofficial Bridgerton musical album. Like, you know, they clearly have some kind of love for musicals or musical theater, so, you know, it in theory should have worked out, but Lin-Manuel Miranda being one of the original voices for what is considered by many an iconic Disney soundtrack, yeah, that is a little concerning, especially when you consider, yeah, they probably didn't get him back because that was the TV show, but now that they've shifted to a movie, it's easier to get your actors in to record lines that might not have done a TV show for an animated project. But, you know, a songwriter, I mean, we already got these songs written. And speaking of the actors, there's a little confusion because, you know, it's that thing of like modern film business industry stuff. You're not exactly sure, you know, what's happening. So there's some confusion, at least on my part, as far as at what point were at least Dwayne Johnson or Ali Carvalho involved in this? Because it seemed like, you know, it kind of just very quickly happened after the announcement in February. Certain posts they're making this year where it's like, you know, it's great to be back in the booth doing the character, or a little while later having someone go, it's our last day of recording this character today, and or something like that. And it's like, okay, so I'm not saying it's a bad thing to fix things later in the day of production, like, you know, that happens all the time, but didn't you guys like just start, or at least that's kind of the impression given to me, but Dwayne Johnson does have an executive producer credit on this, so mayhaps he was involved ever since it was a TV show, or did they just get him on to do that? He's all the while working on the live-action Moana remake, so is he just now, like, really integral to the process of any more Moana stuff? What's going on? Something that was interesting to me is that back in August of this year, August 21st, I think, Dwayne put up a video on his Instagram that was basically like a mini documentary kind of behind the scenes thing of him meeting the team. They're talking about Maui's new song, and it's the day that he's going to record it. And something that was interesting to me was that near the end of the video, he asked, like, when's the next test screening? And I think it was Jared Bush who said, November, when it's in theaters. And, you know, there's a laugh in the room, like, ha ha ha, and then Dwayne's like, okay, all right, pressure's on. And it got me thinking, you know, this video was uploaded to Instagram in August. It doesn't mean that they recorded that exact day. It could have been a couple days before. It could have been a whole, like, month or two before. But the fact that, you know, they're at a point where there are no more test screenings, if this song fucks up, we're stuck with it, so let's just go in and try to make it the best we can, and Dwayne Johnson adding in, yeah, this is pressure, you know, it does make me think, yeah, a lot of this seems like it was rushed to, like, fit the film medium, not just even, like, truncating the episodes into an hour and 40-minute movie, but even getting your cast back in and doing these songs. It gives an aura of, like, we're rushing to a finish line that we have now given ourselves for no real reason. Like, we could have pushed it a bit, you know, we didn't have to do this, but this is what we're doing. And then the last thing that there is, as far as, like, you know, reasons to be skeptical, was basically Disney animation as a whole right now. I mean, we can talk, you know, endlessly about how, you know, they hired a team to do a TV show, but because of their repurposing of it being a film, they're not going to change the salaries, you know, to reflect making a movie. You basically have a whole team here that is being paid to make a TV show, but now their work is going to films, and a lot of their work is probably getting cut out because it doesn't fit the runtime. It's also been outsourced, so it's not being animated in-house. It's like outsourced to a Vancouver studio, I'm pretty sure, to try to probably keep costs low. They probably crunched a lot of these artists just to get it out on time for Thanksgiving to really make that narrative fit into an hour and 40 minutes. And that aside, you have their recent efforts not really being that great. I guess ever since Frozen 2, for me, that's when I noticed, like, yeah, that feels like a straight-to-DVD Disney sequel. Feels like they didn't really have a strong idea, but they had an idea to do more. So they did it anyways without finalizing it or anything. They missed 2020 because of COVID, but Raya and the Last Dragon was their next movie, and I've kind of been very indifferent towards that movie ever since I saw it. It was just kind of like, well, it's fine. I think Shafrillis does a really great job of kind of going in depth as far as like why that movie ultimately fumbles. Really great. Recommend that channel, recommend that video. But that's kind of how I felt about Raya. Was like, it just doesn't feel like a strong story. It feels like they had an idea, but they really, like, something went wrong with the execution. Like, a lot of obvious dialogue as far as like, trust, I'll never trust you again. Why should we trust you? Man, I trust Stop saying fucking trust. Stop fucking hammering that in because you think the kids are fucking stupid. God damn it. But Encanto came out months later, which is a great movie. With Lin-Manuel Miranda, by the way. That's a great Disney musical. But then they followed that up with Strange World, which is, once again, just like, I don't feel any big hatred towards it. It's just, I'm indifferent. And then the next year is Wish, which was the biggest disaster, just as far as that's their 100th year anniversary special. And they decided to, you know, honor that 100th anniversary is to make a fucking mediocre movie. Which makes it worse, you know, walking out of it, like, if it's just on its own, it's like, it's just kind of mediocre, but in context of the history of Disney and the references that they try to, you know, cram into that movie, because this is special, damn it, this is fucking Disney, 100 years of Disney! These characters are based on the seven dwarfs, even if those characters fucking suck! The songs are fucking awful, everything about that is just so derivative and feeling very, like, narratively confused as far as, like, what it wants to be. Big disaster all around. Didn't make any money, big disaster. So, yeah, these past couple years of Disney have been rough, and then you throw in they're making this weird choice to make a show into a movie. once again, this could be a straight-to-DVD Disney sequel. It was not looking good. But the trailers weren't bad, you know, it looked like, you know, a good movie from the marketing, so I was like, I want this to work out. I desperately really want this to be good because I would like to see more Moana. I love them exploring the mythology stuff for Pacific Islanders, for Polynesian people. I fucking love the character of Moana. I think, you know, as far as like Disney leads that we have gotten, she is up there for me as one of my favorites. I love what Ali Carvalho brings to her. I even love Maui. Like Dwayne Johnson, I know I've been hard on him in some other movies, especially recently with Red One, but as Maui, he even talked about back when the first one came out, he didn't want to just come in and fuck up the voice work because he's a, you know, celebrity who doesn't know how voice acting works. He really wanted to try, and it does show in that performance. So I really wanted this to work because I love that movie. I love these characters. I love the potential here. And you know, it's so middle of the road. Let me just get the obvious like positives out of the way first. You know, the animation, despite certain aspects of it feeling like a little bit of a step down compared to the first, like kind of little things as far as like maybe some character animation, some lip syncing stuff maybe, and even the way the water looks fantastic in the first Moana, and then this it's kind of like, well, it's water. So there's some little things like that, but there's still some pretty stunning visuals in this, some really fun creature design, new creatures showing up in this, and some new characters they introduced that have a fun, unique look. The animation still looks good in that respect. There are some fun action sequences that they're able to put into this that I enjoyed watching, you know, very inventive and unique, and it's not a bad idea. The story that they have here, you know, to continue the lore and growing the characters, it's not a bad jumping off point whatsoever. Like there's a couple ideas here where I was like, that is really good. I do like what they're trying to do there. Like something they reveal about the Kakamora, the little coconut guys. Like I actually kind of really love that idea as far as getting to know them more and growing them, as far as like they're more than just like the random side villains that show up. Like there's a bit more history to that, and I kind of like that addition. And the voice acting is still pretty strong. What I was saying before about like Dwayne Johnson, you know, he really cared about putting in a good performance in that film, and that is still the case here. Like his energy and spirit as Maui is still very much intact for this movie, and that was really just refreshing to see, especially seeing in the years since Moana of like Dwayne Johnson finding a comfortable lane for him and just kind of coasting. You know, hearing his voice and hearing that just energy again is like, oh, thank you. That's why people love this guy. That's why I used to really care for this guy, because he, you know, there is a spirit here that is fun to watch, even if it is animated. And Ali Carvalho, once again, nails it as Moana. She still has the same spirit, the same energy levels. You know, this adventurous spark inside of her is still present. And it's why I love watching this character, because she's just so much fun, and you can relate to, you know, someone who is coming of age. She's a teenager. I think at this point she's probably an adult, and I kind of feel like a kindred thing of like seeing her want to go out there being nervous about what's ahead, but doing it nonetheless. Like that's, you know, inspiring, and I love that energy. Ali Carvalho, you know, is just sensational, and, you know, singing-wise, you know, because this is new original music, certain notes that she hits, she's got one of the, you know, best voices as far as like young talent today. So, you know, put her in more stuff, put her in everything. So those are the like obvious positive stuff that, you know, just kind of get out of the way. It doesn't mean that they're any less in this movie. Like, no, there's still positives. It's just the more interesting thing is how this movie kind of fumbles for me. Something that I noticed right away is that the editing, the choppiness of that first act is very present. It's one of those movies where I was able to kind of pinpoint, okay, they're probably doing it like one song per episode, or maybe they cut some songs at some point in the retooling of this series into a movie, so who knows, but it certainly feels like the structure was one song per episode, and when you kind of figure that out, you can kind of pinpoint, this is the beginning of this episode, this is the end, alright, this episode is going to be about this, and it's going to end on this like cliffhanger here, and then, you know, this last chunk, like the third act, is essentially like, we're probably watching a full episode of the show right now. This is probably untouched. I don't know how long the series was gonna be. I know that they described it as a long form show. It could have been one of those 6-episode events. But if you look at the runtime, you know, hour and 40 minutes, by the way, shorter than the first Moana by a couple minutes. Okay, let's say that the average running time for the episodes would be like 25 minutes. So with your hour 40 minutes, which is 100 minutes, and if we're saying our average for episode was 25, and 100 minutes is about like the length of 4 episodes, and there's no way, if this was a long form series, there's no way it was 4 episodes. I think they cut out a lot more that probably would have helped. establish our characters and properly develop them throughout. One of the biggest things is this new, like, Bat Lady character that is kind of introduced as a bit more of an antagonistic force. And I was like, okay, what do we got? Let's learn more. What's the drive? I'm interested, because the last villain, it works for that movie, but there's not much of a personality, but we have someone with a face, who, can interact more with our characters. So what do we got with her? And instead, they go in a different direction of like, well, actually, she's a villain, but only because she's kind of forced to be, but also she wasn't really doing anything villainous before, and it's all good. She's going to encourage Moana now. That part of the movie I found to be really confusing as far as like how they switched up that character seemingly out of nowhere. And it made me think, once again, I bet that's something that got cut down significantly, is that maybe there's an episode dedicated entirely to changing this villain into more of a good guy or seeing their plight or whatever. Instead, it's just kind of this like half-assed turn. But was it a turn? I don't know. I found that to be the biggest jarring thing as far as like character development, as far as like what they were trying to do with that story. And then you have Moana's crew, which kind of comes up out of nowhere. Like the way it begins, once again, you can pinpoint the structure of like what was supposed to be an episode. It begins with Moana's mom telling her like, all right, if you're going out on this adventure, you gotta pick a crew. And I can picture that that's the start of some episode. And then we revisit characters that we've been seeing for like maybe the past two or maybe just one episode, the pilot. And the way, I don't know, like this whole island has people who like want to sail. Like at the end of the last movie, you have like people sailing with her, people want to do that. It's part of their culture. And she picks the three dumbest people to come along. Like, okay, you need someone who can garden, who can like make food on this boat, you know what I mean? So you need a gardener, but she picks the cranky old man who doesn't want to be anywhere. I'm sure, and we've seen other gardeners, I'm sure there are other options, right? You have this woman who's like claiming to be an expert on sailing. She knows all about the mechanics of building a boat and what's gonna make them go faster. But in one of her early scenes, she's just hacking away at a boat when they're already out to sea, changing their course, and Moana's trying to fix it. Moana is fixing it, but the smart one is like still chopping away at shit and like ruining everything, and it's like, what? Like, what is this writing here? Like, okay, you told me she's smart, but right now what I'm seeing, she's really fucking dumb. There's probably a better pick there. And then you have like the muscle guy, but he's like a big fanboy of Maui, and that's kind of the end of his characterization. There's no real like character arcs for them either. It almost feels like maybe they tried at some point near the second act low point, but I wouldn't really call that like a character arc thing, what they do with one of the characters. It's just kind of a thing that happens that they eventually just get over off screen. So it's these characters, like, they have very poor development. When they're introduced, it's just very quick, you kind of think like, oh, these are characters that we won't see. They're just kind of part of the opening song. Instead, yeah, they're just tagging along for the rest of the journey. They're all comedic relief. They don't vary as far as like, this guy's like the more serious, like, warrior type. This one's comedic relief, or this one is like the wise one, something like that. They're just all comedic relief. But Moana already has 2 animal comedic relief characters accompanying her, and it's like, man, there are 6 characters technically on this boat, and I only really care about 3 of you because of the last movie. You can lighten the load, you know what I mean? Or at least replace them with characters I like or find interesting, and that was just not happening with these guys. But you're stuck with them. The comedy is not as sharp as it was the first time. As a result, there's still some chuckle-worthy things for sure. Hey, what they try to do with like, hey, as far as like how stupid this chicken is, what kind of situations he gets in, I find that funny. There's, the odd line here and there from Dwayne Johnson's Maui that I found funny. And, Moana's so energetic and just so like friendly and lovable. Anything she does can put a smile on your face, even if for a moment. But for the most part, I thought a lot of the humor here was just a bunch of clunkers. It all builds to a finale that, I didn't hate the third act completely. I think I just wish I cared about the journey there a lot more. But when you're there and seeing what they decide to do to end on it to grow the characters, I'm like, see, this is why I wanted this to be better and why I saw potential here, because this is cool stuff. And instead, you have to go through so much middling nonsense just to get here, and it doesn't really come together. There's a Marvel-esque mid-credits scene where they introduce like the big bad guy for probably a Moana 3, and it's like, what? And this is somebody who's technically been the main villain the entire time, but, there's no personality. So once again, I do not care about the antagonists, the Bat Lady or this other one that's technically the main villain, but I was kind of baffled by that. There's one funny thing that happens in that mid-credit scene, I will give them that. And I'm not opposed to seeing any more Moana after this, but it is like, man, we just got through a really rough, middling, just overall just kind of lame sequel, so you would really have to step it up for 3 if you're gonna go there. I am not really invested in this side of things, and I do like Moana and Maui, but the thing is that that tension that was there for them in the first movie, they have to figure some stuff out. Maui is the legendary demigod, but he's a bit of a buffoon and he's kind of lost his way in a couple of years. Moana, is adventurous and spirited, ready to go out there, but there's a lot of things that she doesn't know, that she's not ready for, and these two characters have to push each other to be better, and they clash, but overall they have to overcome these things to work together, and they become friends because of it. That tension is gone, and they don't try to replicate that in any new way for this film. It's just when they finally do meet up about a little over halfway through, everything's all cool and everyone's a good friend and everyone's encouraging each other and there's no strife or tension anywhere. And it's just, I don't know what I'm supposed to be invested in or find suspense in here. The last thing I want to talk about, maybe a little bit more in depth, maybe a little too in depth before I give the grade, is the soundtrack. And when I say like this is an underwhelming soundtrack, I'm sure there might be some people who are like, well, what about it makes it underwhelming? And I'm sure some other people might struggle to really like describe what exactly makes a soundtrack not as good as something else, especially in the case of like a sequel, like Frozen 2, for instance. Like I remember that kind of being like, well, the soundtrack's not as good as the first, and a lot of people just saying like, well, what about it is not as good as the first? It can't just be the first one again. And we're not going to talk about Frozen 2, but for this movie in particular, I think I've kind of nailed down why it feels so underwhelming. But first I want to track, the songs from the first Moana. So the first movie opens up with the introductory Status Quo song. You have her father singing, this is the way it's always been, and this is the way it's always going to be, wink wink. There's definitely not going to be any plot progressions that propel us into a new direction, wink wink. It's the Status Quo song. And then the next song after that is the character I Want song. That would be How Far I'll Go. Moana wants to do this. There are certain things holding her back. Am I able to overcome these obstacles, whether it is like physical or just emotional obstacles, to go out there and do the thing I know I was meant to do? The next song after that, you're introducing a new character, a very important character, and it's a comedic relief song. Introduces the character very well, establishes what kind of dynamic he and Moana are going to have. The next song is the Shiny song from Tamatoa. That's a villain song. But it's not just, characters start singing and it's just about shiny objects. They use the opportunity to cast doubt on Moana's adventure, on Maui's, growth back to the demigod he once was. It's a really well-used villain song. And then after that, you have your second act low point song, need some encouragement from the spirit of grandma. And then you have your finale resolution stuff. Moana 2, it opens up with We're Back, which is the reintroduction, status quo song. This is the way things have been, and it's the way things will always be kind of song again. And the title kind of works as like a, we're back, as in like, yes, the thing you love is back. It also can work as a, oh, we're back to the same thing again, because the song is pretty much just like, well, it does feel like they're trying to just do, that other song again. Okay, and then the next song is the I Want song. This time it's Beyond, sung by Moana, and yeah, there's a sense of, again, we're back. You kind of get this sense of like, it's about the same, but, it doesn't have that spark that it had the first time. It also doesn't help that that sequence is like edited, kind of like a music video where like Moana will like walk in slow motion into a dramatic pose, looking off as the music goes on. It's also a little too generic, modern poppy, for its own good. The next song is the comedic relief, the team bonding that the crew do, and it's like, man, I wish I could like this song. I don't really find it all that funny because I don't find any of these characters funny, and this is a point where they try to do a Lin-Manuel Miranda-esque rap. Like I said, the soundtrack is Lin-Manuel Miranda-less, so they attempt to, put a rap back in there, but it's, it's just missing that spark, that thing that made the first movie what it was. Now, in the first Moana, the next song after the comedic song was like a villain song. And that's kind of how Moana 2 starts, but like I said, the villain Bat Lady is not a villain, so it turns from like villain song to an encouragement song. And then in the first Moana, after the villain song, there's an encouragement second act low point song. And then Moana 2, after this not villain encouragement song, you get another encouragement song, this time from Dwayne Johnson, who is not singing or attempting to sing like he did in You're Welcome, and he's not rapping. It's like boldly talking while a soundtrack plays behind him. It is the weakest follow-up they could have come up with to follow Maui's very fun, incredible You're Welcome song, but it's also, structurally for this movie, 2 encouragement songs back to back, and both of them are a little too modern, generic, for their own good. And then after that is your resolution stuff, you know, nothing too wrong there. They do a reprise of We Know the Way, so it's like, once again, just going back to the feeling of, we're doing this again. So what I'm essentially trying to get at with like going through both of those soundtracks, comparing them, is that it almost feels like they were trying to recreate beat for beat the same kind of sound and the same kind of style that the first Moana had, but they fumbled in the middle. And also, they, like I said, just make certain songs a little too modern and too generic poppy for their own good. Like, there's certain points where I was listening to the songs and I was like, this does feel designed to be played during commercials on Disney Channel to promote Radio Disney. Like, that's kind of the vibe. Especially, like I said earlier, there are certain shots in Beyond where it feels edited to be like a generic music video of like Moana doing a slow motion walk and a dramatic, but like that reeks of like music video style. And when you're doing a movie musical, you should probably do your best to stand apart from like generic modern day music video stylings, you know what I mean? Like that just doesn't really work for like a movie musical. You gotta get in there, you gotta interweave it into the plot of the film, you gotta make it important for the characters. It just has to fit for the movie's context. I think something happened, like when you're creating an original idea and it's a musical, part of your inspiration to make it a musical is the music, so when you're doing a sequel, maybe something gets lost in translation as far as development. You're so focused on, we have to figure out what the follow-up is, how do we justify the sequel, and where to continue from there, and then the music stuff kind of comes later. You're more focused on what happens next in the plot as far as what happens next musically. So it just feels very derivative, and I hate to say, you know, we could have used more Lin-Manuel, because Ali Carvalho had a great quote as far as like, you know, more women, you know, shaping Moana's narrative musically is a great idea because the 2 new lyricists are women, and that is genuinely a great idea, and, you know, not bad at all on paper, but in execution, the songs that we're hearing are like, man, it just feels like the poor man's version of what Lin already did in the last one, and maybe because they're missing that original voice to come in and be, we already did that, here's how we can push it forward, or you really push the actors like Dwayne Johnson in particular to like try again. Like I've been saying, it just creates a soundtrack that feels very underwhelming, and a movie that is overall very underwhelming. I'm gonna give Moana 2 a C. It's just very straight down the middle for me. I wanted to love this so bad. I still love these characters, and like I said, I am totally down to see more of this world, but I don't want the like storytelling to suffer. Like I want them to actually put like some thought, not just into the narrative of the film, but also musically. How are we going to up the game? There's a lot of talk whenever you do sequels of like, man, we're really going for it this time, but it didn't feel like it, you know? I know Dwayne Johnson said that, we're really pushing it with the technology. Ha ha ha! But it does not feel like that in this movie. It all feels like reheated leftovers. And that's basically the recipe of a straight-to-DVD Disney sequel. And I know I said that about Frozen 2 also, but I mean, if the shoe fits, you gotta wear that. The Rock. But if you've seen Moana 2, leave your thoughts down in the comments below what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.